Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's so good to be with you. My name is Stephen Crandell. I'm Director of Content at Spiritual Directors International, SDI. Many of you, of course, are from our community, and you know that. And it's so good to be here with you. I'm going to introduce William Peters in just a moment, but I want to take a moment like we do often when we gather, and a contemplative. And I'm going to ask you to breathe with me, just 3 breaths. I'm going to say a few short words. Won't take but a minute. And then we're going to take 3 breaths, all right? So remember, we're taking off the overcoats that contain all our worries, all our distractions, all the negativity we might have picked up during the day. Please open your heart and hear this prayer, no matter what your tradition is or your spiritual orientation, no matter if you're tall or short, whether you're worried or upset, or you're just as content can be. This is my prayer for all of us today. May we make space, and may we be grateful for the space to breathe and be. May we embrace peace and be grateful for the peace that is a gift that opens us up and allows us to be whole. May we awaken to love. May we awaken to love. May we awaken to love and be grateful for the love that connects us all. And may we be healers of the universe together with God, or however you name this universe, this source that connects us all. May we heal with each other. May we be healers of the universe. May we be healers of the universe together. Wonderful. Wonderful to be here with you. Thank you for coming. William Peters is going to tell his own story today. So I'm not going to bother telling his biography, although he does happen to have a new book out called At Heaven's Door, which is wonderful. I will just say that I know William Peters and have known him since my father and I did one of his workshops with his Shared Crossing nonprofit. And I will just say that for us, it was truly an extraordinary opportunity. I don't speak here to promote William, but just to say that I'm grateful as someone who was in his workshop. And the reason was my father was in his 80s, and years before he died, but only a few years, we got together and actually practiced his death, talked about it, and it made all the difference. It was truly wonderful. And it made me realize that being awake to death and the truth that it carries in our lives makes our lives richer, not poorer. Beautiful thing. So thank you for that, William. And William, I introduce you now. Please lead us.
Well, Stephen, thank you so much for inviting me to be here with your community. And, you know, I have very fond memories of my work with you and your father. And as it turned out, your sister and niece had a shared death experience. And we're going to talk about that today, because in my work as a psychotherapist, working in grief and bereavement and the spirit and the integration of spiritually transformative experiences, I know of no other experience at the end of life that is more meaningful, more connecting, and more loving than the experiences we're going to talk about today. So with that in mind, I'm gonna let's get started. I'm going to tell you what we're going to discuss today. Oh, we're going to share a screen now. Okay, here we go.
You may see William's helper, Kelly Rose.
Yeah, Kelly Rose is helping me get set up here. Why don't you pop in for a second, Kelly Rose? Come on in.
So I can see her. There she is. She's wonderful, and she's helping us along. So they're just getting their slides going.
Good. Okay. Can we go all big? Excuse me.
It should be. Is it shared? Asking if it's shared.
Are we shared now, Stephen? What are you seeing?
We can see the array of them in the smaller image, so you need to make it bigger.
We need to go big.
Let me see if I can do it again.
Can we go?
I could do it just really quickly.
Go ahead.
I'm just gonna- Oh, that one didn't work last time. So
Perfect.
that-
Okay. What are you seeing now?
I can see the first slide. Looks great.
Okay, great.
Okay.
All right. So here's what we're talking about today. Shared crossings, exploring shared death experiences for the dying and their loved ones. And I'm going to begin. Here's kind of the outline for what I hope to discuss today. I'm going to share how I got into this work, introduce the Shared Crossing Project and its research briefly, describe the end-of-life continuum of end-of-life experiences, and define the shared death experience. And we're going to see some case studies that really let us know what this experience is all about. And then I'm going to identify the positive aspects of the SDE. But before I do that, I'm going to call Kelly Rose back up here one more time. Kelly Rose, I want to go big screen on this.
You're muted, William.
Thanks. We're just trying to get it set up.
Okay, no problem.
Sorry about that.
Folks, while they're setting it up, I'll just remind you that as William makes his presentation, if you have questions, go ahead and write them in the chat. We're going to be, I will facilitate the questions through the chat because we're such a big group. We won't be taking them verbally. So just go ahead and write them in there. And about with 20 minutes to go, we're going to start taking the questions. So they are important and I will be aware of them.
Okay, now we're ready to go, I think. No, we're not. Sorry. Now we're ready. Okay, so I'm going to start with number one on my list, which is kind of how I got into this. And I would never have imagined that I would be doing the type of work that I'm doing at this point. It's not something that one thinks about when in my upbringing. I grew up outside Silicon Valley in a very traditional, upper middle class family. My father worked in Silicon Valley, and I was just going along living my life. And then at 17 years old, I went up to do some, just a typical short ski vacation with some friends in Lake Tahoe. And I suffered a really kind of horrific skiing accident where I crushed my spine. And in that moment, I was catapulted out of my body. And I saw the first thing I remember after it went dark, but I still had an observing sense of self there, if you would. And what I remember when I got my vision back was I could see my physical body on the ski slope. And then I started moving away from it. So I never had this view before in my life, but I was moving quickly away from my body into, the sky. I saw Lake Tahoe. I saw the Sierra Nevadas. I saw the San Francisco Bay Area, Colorado Rockies, continental North America. And then I had a satellite view of the Earth. And I was very much at peace, very happy, no sense of upset or distress. And then I saw a life review come in front of me. Everything I'd ever done in my previous 17 years of my life up to that point was just coming up to me in like slideshow projection. But every one of these slides had an affective impression on me as well. I realized, oh, that wasn't a good realization, or, oh, that was loving, or, wow, that was kind, or, ooh, that didn't go so well. That was kind of mean. So I really got a lesson in karma, like cause and effect, and with my actions. this went on for, I don't know how long, but I was still moving in this beautiful solar system, was hyper alive, more real than real, as I learned from my later research in the near-death studies, is a common expression about how to define these experiences. Then I was in the tunnel, a tunnel that was translucent, but I was clearly going somewhere and rapidly. In the distance, I saw the light. And in that moment, I realized I was dying. And I realized I had been there hundreds and hundreds of times. This was a very familiar place to me. And I was quite upset because I said, my first reaction was, I wasted that life. I didn't do what I came into this incarnation to do. So when I finally entered into the light, I was pleading with God. I grew up Catholic, and that to me was no doubt in my mind that I was talking to God. And that light was very relational in a certain way. It could hear me, it could see me, it could feel me. It felt loving and kind, but it also felt enormously powerful, like beyond any power and majesty I'd ever felt. I was pleading with that light to give me another chance to go back. Let me go back. And I felt a push back on my body. And I started spinning the other way. And as I did that, I heard that light say to me, make something of your life. I returned to my body on the ski slope, and I was thankful in a certain way, but I never thought of that experience for another 10 years or so. It just never, I don't think it ever had a place in my everyday reality. I might have dreamed about it. I do remember having memories of it in my dreams, and at weird certain times, things would happen, but I never talked about it with anybody. But it changed me. There was absolutely no doubt that the trajectory of my life changed dramatically from that experience. I went on to college, lived a somewhat normal college life, except that my ability, my identity as a healthy, active, athletic young man was shattered. It was done. I was managing increasing pain and limitation. I couldn't really sit very well without severe pain, and athletics were out of the question. And I just was quietly suffering in desperation. And being a college student, and I actually was in a fraternity of all places. That was kind of my trajectory out of high school. You know, I was a good athlete. You know, I wasn't so much a party person, but I certainly enjoyed socializing. But as I was in that experience, there was a major crossroads happening at a soul spirit level. And in between my junior and senior year, I did a trip to Europe and found myself in Greece and wanting to go up to Budapest, but there was nothing on my map. In those days, we traveled with Let's Go Europe, and the Eastern Bloc countries were not included in Let's Go Europe. So I decided, I convinced a couple of friends I was with, let's just go overland and see if we can get through Yugoslavia. And so we did. We took an overnight bus ride from northern Greece and woke up the next morning in what is I now know as Bosnia, the Muslim part of what was, you know, old Yugoslavia. And when I got up, I was groggy and tired. I pulled the shade back on my bus window and I looked out, and what I saw in front of me was a sea of Muslim women with their burqas on and their eyes very intensely looking at the bus with their arms stretched out. In a certain sense, I mean, they were desperate and they were begging for food and money. I had never seen this in my life before. I had no relationship to this at all, except that the desperation that I felt and the sincerity of it really hit my heart directly. I started weeping. And I wasn't a person who cried a great deal, not for, emotional or sentimental reasons. I was deeply touched by what I saw in the eyes of these women. At that moment, I made a very unforeseen commitment to myself. And that was that I need to work and need to be with people like this. They have something I need to learn. That's all I could say. I didn't have any other language that I need to be with people like this. I need to learn something from them. That was it. I found myself 2 years later living and working in Central and South America. I was with the Jesuit International Volunteer Corps. I said I grew up Catholic. I went to Jesuit prep school. And so I had contacts in the Jesuit missions. And so I took a position with the Jesuit International Volunteers and first started out in Belize, Central America, which was really lovely. And although quite impoverished at the time, was easier than where I would go next. I was teaching high school there. Later, I found myself in Guatemala for language studies and some social service work, and a civil war was occurring. This would be the mid to late 80s. So it was, you weren't supposed to be out at nights, and there was feelings of terror around. Still relatively modest in terms of, the political situation was mild compared to where I would go next, which was a placement in southern Peru during a very intense civil war. And I was working with displaced Aymara indigenous families, and primarily their kids. There I saw a great deal of death and destruction, starvation, illness, military brutality. It was kind of a lawless time. Not that there weren't, civil organizations, the police and the military doing their thing. It was just when the sun went down, it just got a little unwieldy and unpredictable. I would have my first share death experience there, and I'll share, and it went like this. We would often go in the summertime in groups of 3 or 4. And I say that because it wasn't really safe to travel alone, but we take the Jesuit Cherokee Wagoneer to the beach. It was about an hour away. Spend a Sunday out there and then come back. On the way back on one hot Sunday afternoon, we noticed on the road a body, and I went up and we stopped the car, and I ran out and did a test of, just basically did a medical first aid test, and realized that this man had a pulse, but wasn't breathing. So I began CPR, and I noticed rather quickly that this was a man of the fields. He was a campesino. And so, he was basically a peasant. He was very simply dressed. But to be clear, he had no alcohol in his breath. It seemed like there was an accident. Maybe he was hit by a vehicle. I don't know. But we moved him into the back of the car. We're going to take him as swiftly as we could to the hospital. And as I was applying CPR and attuning to him and assisting him and just seeing what might have gone on to cause this trauma, I noticed that there was a pressure pulling up on me from my chest up. And then I also realized that I was feeling presences. I was disoriented. But these presences I was feeling, I couldn't identify, but it was a very affirming sense of, you're doing the right thing. Like, just keep doing what you're doing. And that's all I can make sense of it. It just felt like I was being called to do what I was doing. And it felt so wonderful to know that my life force energy in that moment was being used for its highest good. When we arrived in the hospital, we dropped off the gentleman, and they told it, we left him in the hospital over the night. I came back and they told me the next day he had a head injury and that he wasn't doing well. I gave blood, came back later that afternoon. They said he still wasn't improving. I came back the next morning and they said he had just died. And I listened to that. I took it in. And I left. I went outside and sat in the courtyard. And I just started weeping. I couldn't understand why. But then that same sense of being pulled upward, that sense of feelings of spirits or presences all around me, were there to comfort me. And they were giving me the same message, something like affirming, you did the right thing. It was highly relational and very moving and disorienting in the sense that I felt I was in a different dimension. And I stayed in that space for a number of hours, if not even that later that night, I revisited it in some way, or it came back to me. So that would be my first shared death experience. And I'll say what that is. A shared death experience occurs when someone dies and a person, usually a caregiver or a loved one, reports that they feel like they somehow accompanied or shared in the journey from this life into an afterlife. And I'll get more into the details of the specifics of that. But later, I would return home from my time of service in Central and South America and find myself working in San Francisco in the late 80s, early 90s. I was hired as a social worker because I was fluent in Spanish. And there's a lot of immigrants coming over the border. But there was also the AIDS epidemic that had basically exploded in San Francisco. And so I found myself privileged with the opportunity to assist a lot of gay men, primarily, who were dying of AIDS and dying very kind of grotesque deaths with body lesions and Kaposi sarcoma. These are very, very skin diseases, and it was just hard to look at and painful for all involved. But I was working with this community, and I befriended. Well, he was a client, but we became, we were so close that I see him so much. I call him, naturally became a friend. But I was really, I had the role of a social worker, so I was providing food and emotional support for him and others. He comes in one morning looking very beleaguered and wiped out. And his name is Brad. And I said, Brad, what is going on? What happened? I've never seen you like this. And he said, oh, I've been up all night. He goes, Randy died in the early morning. I said, oh, I'm so sorry. And he said, I'm sorry too, but it was so beautiful. I said, so beautiful, tell me. And he said, yes. He said, when Randy died, we were circled up. And I should say that Brad lived in a homeless encampment in south of Market. In those days, south of Market was, in San Francisco, was a kind of the part of the Skid Row of San Francisco, if you will. So he was in a kind of a burned out building. So he describes his brothers. He called this community he lived in with brothers. And he said, Randy, at the moment of death, went up a cylinder of light. And at the top of this cylinder, he looked back at everybody, and we noticed that he was healthy, he was younger, he was vibrant, and he was happy. And he said to us all, thank you for caring for me. I love you, and goodbye. And he was gone. I had no reason to doubt Brad's experience. I had had my own near-death experience. This was a familiar place to me, even though I never talked about it. When he said it, he looked at me as if to check out whether I believed him or not. There wasn't an ounce of hesitation in me that I knew he was speaking truth. This is a shared death experience. It was and I would hear other stories from my time as an HIV, working with persons with HIV and having these deaths, these highly relational, people close working together. And at the end of life, this type of experience would happen. I would go on after this experience and have another near-death experience. Briefly stated, I had a blood imbalance of idiopathic thrombocytopenia, found myself in an ICU. My platelets were crashing. I was drowning in my blood, but I survived. in the middle of the night of this experience, or the first night in the ICU, I popped out of my body. I didn't even know when I popped out. I just realized I came into awareness of me looking down on the hospital staff and moving around the 10th floor of Kaiser Oakland ICU, very much at peace, not even realizing I had an identity. Like I didn't know I was William. It wasn't until the doctor, the specialist, the hematologist came in and tapped on my hand, which I did not feel, but he called out my name, Mr. Peters, Mr. Peters. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's calling out my name. And I said, and I moved into view and I realized, oh my gosh, that's me in the bed. I remembered that was me in the bed. Then I had this question. Do I answer him? What if I do answer him? What will happen to me if I answer him? I thought with that for a while, and then I just said, I'll answer him. And as I answered him, I went back into that body. I felt my energy fill up that body. I could feel him tapping on my hand. And my view changed from seeing him and from the top, from his crown, I was now looking at him through my own eyes into his face. And that all happened in a matter of seconds. So that would be my second near-death experience. And I was very interested now in death and dying. Like, what does this mean? About 6 or 7 years later, after being present to a few more deaths, primarily family deaths, and being close to them and having some other experiences, I really decided to commit myself to learning about this death experience. And I joined the Zen Hospice Project of San Francisco as a volunteer. I was training as a psychotherapist at the time, but I really wanted to get close and use the Buddhist principles of awareness, presence, and just being with whatever arises without much of an agenda, just being. And as a volunteer, I could do that for 6-7 hours a shift and be at one or a few bedsides. So I had been working with Ron. Ron had been a merchant marine in his life, and he had been unresponsive for the last few weeks, really. But I had still been reading to him because, as we know in end-of-life care, hearing is the last sense door to go. So I was reading to him on this afternoon. I still remember it, a still, sunny afternoon in San Francisco, Laguna Honda Hospital, a public hospital, 24-bed, open ward, old hospital. And here we are just reading, and I pop out of my body. I am suspended above my body and Ron's body. My body is just there reading. Ron's body is prone in the bed. I'm a little stunned to be up there, but I'm okay. It's pleasant. I look to my right, and there is Ron. Ron's big, beautiful face, open eyes, glowing, and his teeth radiant, smiling. And he's telepathically telling me, look at this. This is where I've been. And it's kind of like a check this out moment. I kind of felt like he invited me there. I can't say that for sure, but it certainly seems that way. After that experience, I went back into my body. I don't even think I stopped reading, but after some time, I went to my trusted supervisor who I loved, Eric Pochet. And Eric said to me, and I said to Eric, I just had this experience. I started explaining it to him. And Eric was a veteran in hospice. And he said, oh, William, you know, all sorts of things can happen here. Sounds like he was between heaven and earth. And I said, but my experience, I mean, it was profound. I mean, I can't believe, and he said, William, phenomena rolling by, let it go. Eric was a true Zen Buddhist. Just stay in the moment. Don't hold on to any experience. So I did, but I would have many more experiences like this in Zen hospice. But I wouldn't share them anymore. Why? Because they were not well received. The medical community didn't want to hear, and they didn't really know what to do with these experiences. So I kept it to myself. And you can see I'm a little hesitant about all this because I I wish I could have said more. I really was yearning to talk about it, but I didn't feel like there was any safe place that would receive it. But that changed in 2009 when I went to go hear Raymond Moody speak. And I thought he was going to talk about the near-death experience. But he spoke about the share-death experience. And what he said was this: you know, I've talked for now almost more than 3 decades about the near-death experience, but there's another experience I want to tell you about. And I call it the share-death experience. It's very similar in phenomena to the near-death experience, except it's experienced by caregivers, loved ones, and sometimes bystanders. Well, when I heard this, my whole body lit up. I know from, Stephen's told me about your community. I know what you know when I say that I felt that energy of goosebumps and coursing through my body, telling me I'm just coming alive, knowing this is something that I need to listen to. I went up to Raymond after the talk and I said, I know about the shared death experience. I've had many of them as a hospice worker and in other settings. And I think I know the terrain really well. Like, I think I can even help people have them. And I asked him, is there any research out there on this? And he said, no, there's not any research at all. It's completely unknown territory. Yes, it's identified in some older research and the London Society for Cyclical Research, but they don't really differentiate it. So this focus study on SDEs has yet to be done. Well, when I heard that, I said, okay, will you help me? And he said, oh, I would love to assist you in any way I can, William. So this began a relationship with Raymond, and I started first I did this. I went back to Santa Barbara, where I'm from, and where Stephen is actually from as well. And I started these groups. The first group was a Life Beyond Death group to look at everything related to death and dying. I'm talking about near-death experiences, pre-death dreams and visions, afterlife, after-death communication, mediumship. We opened up the whole field. In this community of Santa Barbara, these groups took off. People loved talking about death and dying, their experiences, their questions, their beliefs. I ran 12 groups of 18 to 25 people over the next 3 to 4 years, really. At the same time, I realized that I needed to start an organization. And because I realized as a grief and bereavement therapist, more and more people were coming into me to talk about their end-of-life experiences. And I realized that people knew very little about what was possible at the end of life and these mystical experiences. As I was doing this, I realized I had to start an organization, and I started the Share Crossing Project. And the mission is, I'll share it a little bit later, but it's really to positively transform people's relationship to end of life through raising awareness and educating people about these end-of-life experiences. And the next step of that mission was to bring people together to dialogue, to share experiences, to support one another. I also started the research arm of this because I realized if we were going to convince the medical community, primarily healthcare providers, of the existence of these experiences, we needed real, robust academic work. So I started both of these. The first study, which actually Stephen was in with his father, was to test these methods I had developed to enable the shared death experience. And too much to go into here, but if you're interested, on my website, on the Share Crossing website, there is the Pathway program is there. And we brought groups of people to go through a series of basically psychospiritual exercises to review your life, to address any unfinished business, to honor death and dying, to just be able to say to your loved ones, I realize that you're going to be dying. This is an exercise that Stephen did with his father, as everyone did in the group. But imagine it this way: Stephen, whose father is, 2 to 3 decades older than him, they're able to have this conversation where Stephen can say to his father, listen, I know you're going to die. I just want you to know that I love you. I want to thank you for the time we've had. And I want to let you know that it's okay that you die when you're ready. And if there's anything we need to say or do, let's work it out now. Let's talk about it now. And in Stephen's case, his father was quite receptive to that. A little bit reticent at first. It's a big talk. It's a big topic. But when you step into death and dying, it demands all of you because it's the final chapter. It's basically acknowledging that death is coming at some time, and that this whole thing that we become accustomed to, thinking that we will wake up to it every day and we'll be here and life will be here. When you take on death, you realize that's not the case anymore. When you really accept that there's a terminal point and it's coming, in Stephen's father's case, sooner rather than later. So these are really intimate conversations. They're emotional conversations. They're spiritual conversations, because we're talking about, what do you think happens after this life? Like, what are your thoughts? Where do you think you're going? Who will you see? Will you die? What does that mean? So this is what these programs did. And the programs yielded pretty good results in terms of our ability to enable shared death experiences. We only have anecdotal data on that, because people don't, a lot of people didn't die in a short period of time, which is wonderful. But I can tell you that the methods were generally about 25% to 50% effective for yielding a shared death experience for our participants. And that's just for the people that, we had 75 go through. So that's, like I said, very anecdotal. But then we did another round of research, and this was focused entirely on the shared death experience. And we wanted to collect and document these experiences, because I realized that I took the shared death experience to be an assumed, valid, legitimate experience that everyone would accept once I shared the data on it. But it wasn't that way. There was a good deal of resistance. So we did a formalized study. The study now has 225 people in it, experiencer accounts. When I did the book, and then we submitted our research that was published in the American Journal of Hospice and Palliative Medicine, that account, or that portion of the study, had 134 cases. And we'll go through that a little bit in a moment. But it was a very significant body of research, because now the medical community has to come to terms with the fact that these experiences happen. They happen in healthy minds. They happen with people who don't even know the experience exists. In other words, they're not expecting this experience to happen, and it happens. Like the case of example with Stephen's sister, Leslie, and his niece, Sarah, who were at the bedside of Stephen's father, and they saw a number of phenomena. Perhaps the most profound one was Leslie, Stephen's sister, reports that as he died, soon afterwards, she had a vision of her father reuniting with his nuclear family, arms around his mother and his brothers. And there had been a bit of some I think relational, not estrangement, but some discord, as is natural with so many families. But what Leslie noted was his brother that he had had a little bit of disagreement with, they were embracing and looked back. The father and Leslie's uncle looked back and acknowledged they've worked it out. It's all good. So what a lovely way for Stephen's father to leave his family, his nuclear family, and leave both his daughter and his niece with the sense that everything's worked out. I'm alive and well. I'm going on. Thank you. So that's a bit about the my journey. I should finish it one more. My father died last September, a year and a half ago. And when I was with him at his death, just moments before he died, I saw both my grandparents. I'd never seen my grandfather before. He died before I was born. And my grandmother was there and my aunt was there. And they acknowledged my presence there. And then later, afterwards, I had a life review with my father that was very healing. Every moment of our life together was shown to me, similar to where my near-death experience, like a slideshow of moments that we shared, some unpleasant, some pleasant, but basically recounting and teaching me that there was indeed a loving relationship. And as I go into in my book, I didn't have a great relationship with my father because of my spinal injury, perhaps my calling in this life. And my father was a businessman, and I went into a more spiritual path, and he didn't approve of it. He often commented that my life didn't make sense to him. And it was hard for him to see me doing things that were not lucrative. So with that, I want to go into the next part of this lecture or presentation, if I can do that. Oh, here we go. So here's the Shared Crossing Project. And oh boy, I realize I've been going on for quite a while. Okay, so we're gonna go through this relatively quickly. Here's the Shared Crossing Project. To positively transform people's relationship to death and dying through education and raising awareness about shared crossings and their healing benefits.
William, I'd just like to say, rather than rush too much, that we will take some questions at the end, and we'll probably go
Okay.
over the hour at this point. Your life story is so fascinating. I'm glad that you went into detail. This is perfect. But
Well,
if people have to leave,
Okay.
then this is all going to be recorded, so you're not going to miss out. All right, is what I want to
Yeah.
reassure people.
I think I can do this next part in like 15, 20 minutes, Stephen, so I won't rush, but I do apologize for getting lost in time. Okay, so I want to share with people the spectrum of end-of-life experiences. This is something that I learned along the way as being a counselor to people at the end of life. As you noticed in my, as I went through my life, I'm a psychotherapist in grief and bereavement. So starting in about 2009, 2010, I specialized in end of life and grief and bereavement. So people would come to me with all these experiences. They knew that I was open to these spiritual experiences, the end of life. And I put this chart together, this spectrum, because I started seeing all of these different experiences: pre-death premonitions, pre-death visions and visitations. Now you'll see synchronicities that happen throughout, all sorts of profound experiences, like people saying that the time of death, that the clocks, the digital clocks stopped at that time of death, or in the after experiences post-death, that they frequently see significant dates on their digital displays, anniversaries, birth dates, what have you. And then there's all sorts of synchronicities that people will talk about, animal behavior being one of them. As a rational person, I was not easy to come to these experiences with a sense of acceptance. I was more dismissive of people kind of doing wishful thinking. But as we've studied this, we have close to 1,000 of these different experiences, and they're well beyond the sense of coincidence. And I think we do our clients and anyone we're dealing with a disservice by dismissing these as chance or coincidental events. I think they hold a lot more meaning for people. They do so because I think they're communications from across the veil. There's also term elucidity, which is this unexplainable physiological behavior just before somebody dies. The famous ones you'll know is Steve Jobs saying, "Oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow," as he's glancing into the distance, a kind of awakening just before he dies when he had been unresponsive for some time before. Also, the most recently, just 2 weeks ago, Betty White dying and calling out to her lifetime partner, Alan. This all suggests things that we see in our research with Betty White. It's clear that in our research, we would say that was Alan coming to greet her, part of the welcoming party. And I'll go into that in a moment here. So these are the experiences that we chart, and that I find that when I work with clinicians, spiritual counselors, mental health professionals, end-of-life counselors, chaplains, this is a real user-friendly guide to help understand and receive people's experiences. So the shared death experience. I've already defined it, but you can take a look at it here. There are three kind of dominant themes. One is journey. This theme of experiencers going along with the journey from this life to what lies beyond in the afterlife. Relationship is central. By that, I mean a connected, bonded relationship seems to be important. That doesn't mean you won't have a shared death experience if you have a strained relationship, because the bond could still be tight, even though it's strained. They're very similar to the NDE, and I'll explain how that is a bit later. There are a number of types of SDEs. There are basically three main types of SDEs. There's a bedside. That means it happens when you're really present at the bedside. And this happens in about a little over like 36% of our cases are at bedside. 64% are remote, not at bedside. And there's a type called a flyby, which is a subtype of a remote that is a very brief experience where the experiencer says that the dying appeared very rapidly and then left, but they had one message for them. Thank you, I love you, goodbye. There's really no other phenomena. There's just a presence that appears, a sensing, and the message is intuited as thank you, I love you, goodbye. We have two subtypes, which are, I'm going to go into the subtypes at the end, actually. I want to go first now into a video of Cynthia Vitale. So Cynthia is going to share her shared death experience that occurred just a few minutes, maybe like 15, 20 minutes after her life partner, she calls him Shar, after he dies. So we're going to jump right into this story, and you're going to see she's going to be talking about her experience just moments after he died.
So I remember lifting up out of my form, my body, and then taking my husband, his name was Shar, by the hand and pulling him up. And then I pulled him up past me, and then he pulled me up past him. And we kept doing that for, for a long time. I don't really know. So a lot of stuff was probably going on that I don't know about. And the sensation was very freeing. He was fully intact. He wasn't mentally compromised then. There was no sensation of constraint or discomfort from anybody's body. And then I saw the light. Almost feel corny saying that, but I saw the light, and it's not like a pinpoint light. It's it's huge light, and I told him that, look, there's the light, and we both turned towards it and went towards it, and then his mother appeared, and in the experience of the light, there was a complete wholeness sensation for me. A lot of freedom was in that. A lot, any of my own psychology wasn't there. None of that was there. It was just that opportunity to experience that. And then his mother reached to him, and then he reached to her, and he looked. He was still holding my hand, and he looked back at me and said, but I want to stay with you. And then he slipped away. And I think that was it. I don't remember too much after that.
So this is a bedside shared death experience. And I want to point out a few features that are really important here. One is that Cynthia refers to this ascension, a pull on her body, a rising up, very common. She's also accompanying Shar. So this is a type of SDE, which we would call an accompaniment. And I won't go into the different, we have a different typology. I found 4 different types of SDEs in terms of the experience of the experiencer, like what mode of participation are they in. In this one, we say this is one in which Cynthia is accompanying. And then by accompanying, that means she is actually moving along this journey that Shar is on as he leaves his body. He's in soul consciousness form, and she's just going up with him. And it's a very beautiful description of holding hands, changing places, and heading towards the light. This is always the direction that these journeys are heading in. And then Char's mother appears, and here's what we call a vision or seeing of a deceased relative. And this is a type of handoff, a beautiful handoff between Cynthia as the primary partner, a lifetime partner with Char, to his mother who obviously they was very close, and from one loving relationship on this side of the veil to another relationship on the other side of the veil. And I want to be really clear. Cynthia is a scientist. She's a geologist by training. She had no idea this was possible. In fact, you even see her kind of be dismissive of the light. I feel corny talking about the light. So here's somebody who didn't even know this experience was possible. And yet she has it. And I can take more questions about this later, but let me move on here.
So
So that's a bedside. Now, I'm not going to show another one of these because just in the interest of time, but I do have I was going to show a remote one, but I'm going to go on a little bit forward here.
There's that.
And I'm going to go into the subtypes here. So it says 3 subtypes. It's really 2. It used to be 3. 2 subtypes, and that means time variation. So you can have an SDE a little bit before or a little bit after an experience, and after a death experience, I should say. So what that means is we have cases, we have, I believe, 9% of our cases happen, I think it's 9%. Am I right about that? Something like that. 9% happen just before a death. That can be minutes, hours, as even up to a day or so in front of it. We also have them that can happen afterwards. I think we have 14% can happen, have in our data happen afterwards. Same thing, minutes, hours, and up to a day or so afterwards. Now you may be asking, well, if it doesn't happen right at the moment of death, how can you call it a shared death experience? Well, the way we work this is, in my way, is I say there's a distinct pattern that happens with the SDE, and I'll show you some more of that in a moment because of the features and such are so clear. But keep in mind, when you cross over to the other side, there's a whole different time-space continuum. So their time over there, and if they're reaching back to us to make contact or initiate this experience, time is a very different entity, if you will, over there. We also have multi-person SDE, so that means more than one person, as in the case of Stephen's family when his father was dying. Sarah and Leslie each had an SDE, and a slightly different one. They had some things in common, but some things different. So, I think in this community, many of you will be familiar with the near-death experience. So this is a helpful way of providing a way of understanding the SDE by its common features. So encountering spirit beings, I should say that in the shared death experience, just over 50% of the experiencers report seeing the dying. 16% will report seeing elevated non-human beings described as angels, beings of light, spirit beings. Usually they're ascended a bit. They have some special knowledge and capacity. Transcendent light, also a key feature in these experiences. Life reviews, I shared that I saw one with my father. They're very common. Unusual energy, this is also the experience you will say, I just felt my body filling up with energy. It was the frequency, I was high energy. I felt like my hissing in my ears or a coursing of something in my body, this shushing sound all around me. Altered time and space, this is very common. People report the dimensions, the size of the room changes, the ceiling goes away, walls go down. You enter into a space that doesn't have edges, seems to be almost infinite, and time becomes almost not perceptible. Heavenly realms, very common, beautiful, high energy, ultra real, the most beautiful, hyper alive landscapes they've ever seen. Sensing presences. This is very common too. People will say, especially at the beginning of an SDE, that they feel the room fill up if they're in the room and presences are there. The room gets thick and they keep finding themselves looking up. I've talked a great deal with birth midwives, and they report the same phenomena, that at time of birth, it seems like the room fills up with beings, presences. And we could make a simple interpretation. I don't know how correct it would be, that maybe family members on the other side of the veil are there to, be present at that time, both for births and for deaths. The veil opens and there's a space where people can gather on both sides. Tunnels and gateways, very common. Bridges, they're depicted in a variety of different ways. Sometimes light serves as a stairway or a tunnel or a bridge. Sometimes there's actual physical bridges. Borders and boundaries. Most of the time, the borders and boundaries in SDEs are felt and sensed. They just realize I can go no further. I think Cynthia alluded to that. It's like, when Shar looked back at her and basically said, I have to go on. And Cynthia realized, yeah, you have to go on and I have to go back. There's a boundary. Profound peace. People talk about this incredible, sublime, heartfelt peace. Ineffability. In all of our interviews, the common descriptor is, I have no words to describe what I experienced, but it was the best experience I've ever had. Feelings of connectivity and unity. Yes, unity experiences, Christ consciousness, a sense of belonging and connection, a sense of knowing everything. Was one person said, or many people have said, I had whatever question I had, the answers were right there for me. So this is this SDE in comparison with the NDE. So the major after effects, the experiencers believe that their deceased loved one are alive and well somewhere. Now this is 67%. By the way, these percentages are helpful, but this is unsolicited. In other words, they just say this to us, like, I believe my deceased loved one is alive and well in a benevolent afterlife. They're convinced of an afterlife, almost 90%. Their grief reconciliation is greatly improved. And by that, I mean, as a psychotherapist, I always am assessing what are people's experience of grief and bereavement. How are they doing? What are their, how are they managing this? What's their pain level? What's their level of stress and strain in their life? And in this case, shared death experiencers will say that they are, they still feel the loss, the pain of the loss, but they hold it in a greater context. In other words, a more meaningful context for the loss. There's a reduced fear of death. About 50% will say that they have completely alleviated their fear and anxiety of death. And this is the beautiful one for those of you who do spiritual counseling and those of us who work with meaning and purpose in one's life. This is a low number, I'm sure, because this isn't one that comes out naturally in our interviews unless we ask for it. The renewed sense of purpose and meaning in their life, so that something about the shared death experience allows them to understand the meaning and purpose for a human life generally, and specifically for their own life. Like, people will come back and say they're changing their professional careers, they're changing primary relationships, they're making more decisions to be invoke or engage in more spiritual practices. As one person said, I'm not watching television anymore, I'm meditating. That was just a couple of weeks ago. Okay, so this is my book. Yeah, that's kind of a hard turn there, if you will. But I was really touched that Jack Kornfield wrote a endorsement. I happen to be a Buddhist meditator by practice that began in the late 90s as I was trying to work out with my great deal of physical pain and emotional pain from my back injury. And I was in the early days of Spirit Rock in Marin County. Now Spirit Rock is a beautiful meditation center, but in those days, Jack would have Monday groups. and in kind of portable kind of trailers. And anyway, so I have a long relationship with Spirit Rock teachers, and Jack is one of them. And what else do I have here? Oh yeah, so here's the thing. If you've had a shared crossing, a shared death experience, or any kind of shared crossing experience, which I put on that chart earlier, please consider offering it to our research. And if you're working with people, as I know you are, and they're having these experiences, we would love to hear from them. And we're very therapeutic in our interviewing. We take time to get to know them and give them a good space to share their story. And then we record the interviews, transcribe them, and so we record them all. And if they're willing, we will put them up on our webpage. So this is join our community. I mean, we have a beautiful website, and I really went to a great expense to create a beautiful website because we provide wonderful resources about end-of-life experiences, these shared crossings. We have a story library, and that's where you can see recorded shared death experiences and other shared crossings, people telling them their stories in their own words. We have research updates, and if you're interested in getting a newsletter from us about our groups, our programs, and our research, you can sign up for our newsletter. We don't send out a whole lot of newsletters. We're very, respectful of people's inbox. And then some people follow us on social media, and that's a way that we're trying to connect really more with younger generations. Okay, so that's kind of it. Do we have anything else? I don't think I do. So I will just go back to leave it on. Can I go back? Here we go. Leave it right here. Okay. Oh, by the way, my book has 28 stories, deeply analyzed, and I lay out a variety of helpful typologies. The book is for lay people, but also for clinicians and mental health and hospice workers and such. So with that, I know I'm at my time here, but I'm happy to stay as long as people would like me to. So I turn it over to you, Stephen.
Well, thank you, William. What a wonderful, fascinating presentation. I love your stories. I love everybody's story, but your story is amazing, and you are also a good story listener. It takes a good listener to really make a story come alive. So what I'm going to do is ask some of the questions that are already in there, and we'll move along that way. I'll be the voice of all our participants. Alicia
Beautiful.
says, how can we begin to gently but effectively educate all of humanity to not fear death, to instead prepare for the awesome experience?
Oh, beautiful question. Well, my response to that is we need to let people know more about what actually happens at end of life. Unfortunately, in the modern era, most of our deaths are overly medicalized, and medicalized deaths are not pretty deaths. Not increasingly, but historically in the last 50 years, there's this sense that, you can prolong your life with medical intervention. And so many people I work with who have terminal cancer diagnoses, they will continue to stay on very aggressive treatment patterns, even though the medical literature suggests there's no efficacy in them to save their life. They're just staying on it in hopes that they'll have that a miracle cure will come through, and they want to stay alive long enough to get it. So I bring those examples up because there are so many people that have seen, over medicalized deaths that are rather gruesome. We need to educate people about not just the beautiful deaths you can have when you withdraw from anything but hospice and palliative care. That's basically comfort care. We need to provide more education about those. And the way I like educating is through firsthand stories. Stephen talked about the value of stories. And the other thing that we can do is we can increasingly let people know about these mystical, spiritual, transcendental experiences that happen at the end of life, and to let them know that these experiences will happen more frequently when they're in the comfort of their own home, surrounded by loved ones, and not in medical settings. So My website and my mission is very clear. We're trying to let people know about these spiritual experiences. It's our mission statement to transform people's relationship to end of life by raising awareness and educating people about these profound and spiritual end of life experiences. That's our mission. So I'm with you. That's the way I think we need to do.
Thank you for that. Glenn asks, he's a hospice chaplain and he's been doing it for quite some time. He said that he's attended folks and for what he called good and bad deaths. He feels that they revolved around, and these are his words, where they were, the individuals who were dying, where they were spiritually. And he asked, do you have that same sense of things?
I would concur with that. The training we do, and Stephen, you remember this in the Pathways training you did with your father. It really takes people through a set of psychospiritual exercises that does a review of people's lives, that asks them to look into their life to see if they have any regrets. Then we teach compassion practices, because we all have regrets. So we teach how to have compassion for yourself and others who have perhaps harmed you. Then we do forgiveness exercises. Then we do, more train people how to, or invite people to reach out and make menses with people where they can. And this process is not a one-time, cure-all. It's a process that begins, and it usually in this process, gratitude naturally arises. So I would agree with Glenn that these spiritual practices to open one's heart, to take responsibility for things that did not go well, and to have gratitude for those lessons and learnings that did go well. These are all things that open one's heart and soul and make one available for a good death. I know that I'd imagine Glenn would agree with this. In my experience, when people are struggling at the end of life and are like irritated and have like grief hallucinations and, all this uncomfortable agitation and suffering, it's often because they have unfinished business in themselves about the life they lived, in relationships, in perhaps business dealings, whatever it is. If we can address that, help the people we work with to address that and come to a peace with themselves, then they open themselves up to a peaceful transition. And they also facilitate the possibility for these shared crossing experiences.
Thank you. Heather asked, do you or does your website offer example talking points for how we can skillfully introduce this topic of dying to the dying or their family members? This topic meaning SDE.
That is a great question. And on the website, no. Not that I know at this time. I say that with some hesitancy because our website's been revamped and we do have literature on that, but I don't think it's been uploaded yet. But I will say that we have a program, because this is a question that we get from all sorts of mental health providers, end of health workers, certainly spiritual care of all kinds. And it's really done best through training, through group, through experiential exercises, practicing with, these experiential exercises where you get to practice dialoguing with one another and seeing how it lands on each other. So we do have a program, but it's not going to be launched until next fall, and it's Shared Crossing Practitioner Certification Program. And it's really the full training on how to learn about shared crossings of all types, learn clinical methods to work with people when they have them. Also just general ways to teach people about these. Like if you want, some people come to us and they want to, so like there's all these hospice educators and coordinators, and they want to know how to work with groups of people. And so we'll train on how to do that, because that's what I've done. I've gone into hospices and done training and taught, how do you bring this up to people? And So no, we don't have that, but I can tell you this, one way to do it is get comfortable with these experiences, learn about them. And, there's a number of resources on our website where you can learn about these. Obviously, if you're interested, my book is a great resource for sure. But then what you can do is look at the video. So if you imagine working with a family, I have instructed people to get familiar with shared death experiences and shared crossings, and then show videos to people, either meet with them or do it together on Zoom, watch the videos and go through them with them and see what their response is to it. If you start talking about these shared crossings, you'll be surprised how many people know about these, have had them, but have never shared them because our culture doesn't allow for it. I say that because I think there's more openness than we think in certainly spiritual people around these. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, I think it is. As a storyteller, I will say that a storyteller is much less threatening and much more inviting than information. You can quote the most compelling statistics and you can make a very well-reasoned, robust argument. And if they've got a wall, it's not going to do any good. But a story that tells a human story that invites them in. And of course, the video you showed was an example of that, how it really can open gates. Mary Ann was a good listener, of course, a lot of good listeners on this call. When you were talking about your first near-death experience, your personal one, William, and you said this had happened hundreds of times before, and this was familiar to you. And so she asked, do you have past life memories from these hundreds of times or the hundreds of lives?
Beautiful question. And, I have done, I'm a past life regression therapist as well. I got trained by Brian Weiss a long time ago. And it's just a toolkit that I use in my psychotherapy practice when people are stuck on things, and primarily in a relationship, they can't work it out. And I say, well, let's go back and suggest maybe we'll do a past life and see if there's some past history. So I practice what I preach. I've had many past lives, and I at that point in time when I was in the tunnel and I saw the light and I had the sense that I'd been here hundreds and hundreds of times, I didn't make any direct correlation to previous lives, but I do know that I have looked at many of my lives, past lives, and I think past life language is a bit deceptive because I think I'm not so sure that they're like their actual past lives. They could be, but there's something in them that is important. At worst, they're wonderful symbolisms or representations of things we need to work out. And I'm not at all adverse to a more fundamental view that past lives are real and we live them and all that. I just think it's much more complex than that. And I don't want to go into that right now, but just the notion that I'm not so sure our lifetimes are linear. I think I'm struggling with that concept of linearity of our past lives. I think there's a lot more in there. My life may be holographic, and the notion of multiverses, like parallel universes, but multiple realities or opportunities to enter into a same reality may be ever available in a certain way. And that fits with my sense of how we learn, because I'll give one example about this. I did a past life regression, and I saw myself back in the Holocaust it was actually in Poland. And I saw myself as a girl having my father ripped away from me. And I saw that. And I also had a past life where I was the Gestapo, a young German Aryan looking person. And I was, harming people, shuttling people in the trains. And I had another experience where I was a father having a child ripped away from me. And I couldn't understand why I would have a similar scene in a time and space, but have different roles within it. And so there's something going on there. And I know because I have a very good friend, Paul Arand, who's Michael Newton's kind of heir apparent teacher. Many of you probably know Michael Newton. He wrote Journey of Souls, and he's the founder of this kind of between life therapy, regression therapy. Anyway, probably said a lot on that, but I very much believe in past life regression and regressions of all time to help unearth psycho-emotional and spiritual issues.
Yeah, I think we can get lost if we look too much to facts, because the way we find truth is often through metaphor. And so, and it really is an expansive truth that is available to all of us. That's my feeling about spirituality, and it crosses all boundaries. Phyllis Chapel has a wonderful comment here. She says, "Thank you for your work." I agree with you, Phyllis. Thank you, William. I add my thanks to you. I am a palliative care physician in an academic hospital. You cannot imagine the relief that my patient's family feel when I tell them that what they are experiencing is real and that there is a name for it. It is,
wow.
It is, sorry, I'm having trouble getting this down, but I want to finish it because it's good. It is uncommon for very impaired advanced dementia for very impaired patients, such as my patient with advanced dementia, no longer verbal, who saw her sister in a vision when her sister died in a remote place. Family with the patient did not learn until the next day that the patient, that the patient's sister had died. So that there's this one patient who was not verbal still had this vision, and to feel affirmed in the experience, which I think a lot of our spiritual companions and spiritual directors are expert at, makes a world of difference, because you're no longer fighting it, and it allows you to resonate with the truth in it, I think. Susan says, is your research all within the US, or are you including other cultures who have different attitudes and experience with death than North America?
A great question. And most of our research is in North America. That's United States and Canada. We do have a good amount of respondents in the United Kingdom and in Northern Europe. We have some in France. We have some in Australia and New Zealand. But as you can tell, about 95% are, westernized modern cultures, primarily either of European descent or Europe itself. We are trying to stretch out. We have, we are been in contact with some researchers in Italy who have contacts in Africa and I think in Asia, some parts. So they're using our methods to expand out, and how their research it's going through a review process right now. But I think our goal is to learn more about how different cultures relate to these experiences. Now, I should say, I lived in Guatemala and I lived in Peru and I worked with indigenous people, and I am somewhat clear on how the different communities, particularly the shamans, made sense of what happens at death and dying, because I was working with them. And my understanding is the shared death experience is for them and is not so much an experience that they pull out as a significant experience. It's just one of many journeys that people go on. And since they do so many, journeys themselves, we call them shamanic journeys, but they basically are able to access and enter into different dimensions, realms of existence, and they have methods to do it. And death is just one journey. It's a final journey, but it's, and shamans accompany the dying on their journeys and come back and report to the family. So they're certainly aware of it. And these are the shamans I dealt with in Peru and Bolivia. And we can learn a lot from them. But as you know, our Western reality demands that a certain type of research is done, a certain type of categorization is done, coding. These are all these research processes that are required for validity and legitimacy as a phenomenon. So I'm not thrilled that I have to do all this research, I can tell you that, but I also realize it's something we have to do. And as the palliative doctor, whose name I forget, mentioned, I think she would speak to how important the research is to validate this.
You just tell us when you need to go. We've got a couple more questions. Are you
Fine. No,
you're okay? Angel
I'm
says,
good.
what-
Thank you. It's a privilege to be able to share this with you.
I imagine that people will be thinking about this long after they turn their computers off tonight. Angel asks, what difference do you think it makes to the one in the afterlife if they have a chance not to resolve issues with loved ones before they cross the light?
Well, I can answer that a couple ways, I think. For one, as I've already described, when someone's dying, when they can leave their loved ones in right relationship. In other words, when they can leave their family knowing that, with the sense that their surviving loved ones know that they love them, know that they care about them, know that they are appreciative for the life they've had together. That's the first piece that allows the surviving loved ones to feel good, and it can allow the dying a sense of closure and completion. And they feel great about how they left their loved ones when they leave. And it's kind of like this sense that Stephen's father had when he looked back with his arms around his nuclear family to tell Stephen's sister, Leslie, that, hey, we're all good now. You don't need to worry about us. Everything's okay. And for Leslie, I remember her telling me, it's like, I said, what did that mean to you? She goes, well, that felt great that my dad was okay and that he was reunited with his mom and his nuclear family. That's just like, what could be better than that? So there's that. Now, the second part of the question you're asking, I'm not sure I understand it fully, and that is, what difference does it make in the afterlife for the dying to know that? I'm not sure this next part. Stephen, did you understand this? Is there a part I don't think I got it. Stephen?
Yeah, I'm here. I just thought, I don't know. I can't really speak I sometimes have trouble understanding what happens right here and now.
Yeah.
In the afterlife, I think she was just thinking, does it make a difference? My personal resonance, I'll just speak about my father since he loved the attention anyway. I know, like he knows. My personal experience, because I have a prayer life that's extensive every day, and I thank him and my mother every day that I'm alive and I'm here. That's part of my spiritual life, and it's sincere, and I've always felt that way. I felt like, wow, I got a chance to be alive and I've made it to almost 63. There's this sense of real deep gratitude about that, and so I know that he's happy right now. I can feel the tingling up the back of my head that we're talking about him. And I had a real resonance because it wasn't my experience. My brother and I went out to get lunch with my dad. We'd had a vigil for days and days, and we just, we went out to get lunch. And so my sister was there. But when I thought, wow, I hadn't thought about that, Dad, that you actually gave something to Leslie by turning back and smiling and waving. And then I had a sense. So my answer to the question, you didn't ask me, Angel, but my answer would be yes, it does make a difference. I think we are infinite beings in our human current manifestation, and therefore, in my view, eternal. And so why wouldn't it make a difference? Why wouldn't everything make a difference? I think it does. So that's my answer. I think it's about time for us to round out. I'll just say Linda has written, thank you for this time and information. I look forward to reading your book and checking out your website. I had an NDE years ago and I have no fear of death as a result. Add her to your statistics. It's a good memory, she said, a near-death experience. That's an NDE. So I think that's a good place to end. William, I hope you accept me speaking on behalf of our whole community to say thank you for your work, for all of your storytelling and your story listening, and for making that bold choice to follow your purpose in life. It's making a difference. It's made a difference today, this afternoon, as we've listened to you. All the best with your book and in all that you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephen. Honored to be here. And I hope this is the beginning of something, because I so appreciate the work that SDI community members do all over the world. So thank you.
Great. And thanks everybody for being here. It was wonderful to share this with you. Take care. And this will be recorded. If you want to go back and consult some of the information, it will be there on our YouTube channel. And we'll let people know about that through our normal channels. So anyway, thanks a lot. Take care. Goodbye. And have a
Be safe.
good everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, William.